Welcome to the ANS podcast, Building a Greener Future. My name's Steve McIntyre. I'm the Principal Urban Environmental Consultant here at ANS Global. I'm specialising with green infrastructure and looking at feasibilities and how we can create a greener and cleaner future. I'm joined today by Katie from Planteria to talk about biophilic design and the future of office working. Katie has much experience in internal green infrastructure, and I'd like to hand over to Katie now to introduce herself. Thank you, Katie, for joining.
Hi, Steve. It's great to see you and be with you today. I'm Katie Le Chevalier, and I'm joining from Planteria Group, as you've mentioned, where I've been for 9 years. And during that time, so much has changed within the world of work. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about that today.
Thank you, Katie. So, as you say, so much has changed in the world of work over 9 years. And I think probably it's fair to say over the last 2 years with COVID, things have even changed again. So we've got, and we're realizing the importance and power of nature. Could you say a little bit about biophilic design and what it means to you and how we should apply it in our designs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think biophilia is something that I personally am really passionate about and have always been really passionate about, even before I actually knew there was a name for it. So what the word biophilia means is the love of life and living organisms, living things. So the word bio means life, and philia is the love of something, the opposite of a phobia. And the way that I would describe it best is the feeling it provokes in you is very much something that you can identify with. So when I was much younger, I lived in London, and in a very built-up area in Vauxhall, and my parents lived out in rural Hertfordshire, and I used to get on the train and go out and visit them. And as I was leaving London and going back out into Hertfordshire, going past those rolling fields, I would feel so different. I would feel instantly calmer and more relaxed as I left London. And that is really the feeling that biophilia brings about. It's our connection, our need to be connected to nature as humans. And I think probably we've just been through a really a time of social experiment with the lockdowns and with the pandemic, where we've all had to stay cooped up at home. And nature has been a key factor in helping people to cope with that lockdown period. So humans, we all feel this need to be connected to nature. It's very instinctive, it's very natural, and it's that understanding that it's doing us physically and mentally doing us good, and that we need to harness that aspect right now at this point in time. So during the pandemic, 45% of people actually stated that they needed to have that ability to connect with nature, to go out on walks, to listen to bird song, to make them feel calmer and happier and more able to cope with it. And interestingly as well, websites showing footage of birds nesting, of zoo cams, live footage of nature had increased hits by over 2,000%. So, this is a real phenomena and something that we've needed greatly to help us cope with the situation that we've just been through.
That's really inspiring. I mean, as you say, it goes back a long time. I mean, Florence Nightingale even made a point, didn't you say, that the connection between health and the dwelling of population is one of the most important that exists. Mm-hmm. So it's all about health, actually, mental health. And that mental health is so important to how we cope with situations.
Absolutely, it really is. And I think that the World Health Organization, before the pandemic hit, the World Health Organization had said that by 2020, the biggest threat to us as humans would be the pandemic of stress. And that is something that really impacts not only just on your mental health, although it's obviously one of the things it impacts immediately and it's noticeable, but long term, being in a state of stress impacts on your physical health too. increasing heart disease and diabetes and IBS and ulcers, all those kind of digestive issues that come about, and even accelerated aging by up to 17 years caused by living in extreme stress over long periods of time. So, we can't underestimate the importance of dealing with stress. And I think this is really where biophilia is so important for us all to think about, wherever we are, whether we're in the workplace or whether you're at home. And clearly, Planteria, we do a lot of work with our clients in the workspace arena, and help them to create spaces that really provide for better well-being for the people inhabiting them. So that's the key focus. But also there's other benefits as well from biophilia, and I'm sure you probably want to come on to that a bit later with some of the other important benefits that can be brought, giving companies a slight edge and competitiveness.
That's really, really important what you say as to how we are and how it affects not just our mental but also our physical. When you think actually we spend up to 90% of our time inside,
Yep.
And so when we start looking at these spaces, we often speak as a phrase of bringing the outside in and the inside out, but that connection is something that I feel we should include it in designs rather than add it. If we start seeing the value of biophilic and how it can increase performance, how it can increase mental health, how it can create a much more positive environment, it should become part of design at an early stage of any project rather than get to the end of the project and see what can be added in. Do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. Steve. And I think that is something that's very much a trend that's being driven by the interior design sector. They've really got to grips with the fact that these spaces, when they're greener and more beautiful and designed in from the get-go, people love them, obviously. They create an absolute wow factor. And you can see with examples of companies like Apple and Google, who have really been early adopters of putting in a lot of greenery into their office space. And more recently, with the boom in the shared workspace market, so people like WeWork and one of our clients, Fore, who have designed these beautiful biophilic workspaces that are just burgeoning with greenery and plants. And it's like walking into an oasis, and people have, they walk into them and they immediately feel uplifted by being surrounded by this beautiful natural foliage. So yeah, I think it's definitely a trend which is really growing. And part of that is by having great designers and architects who have adopted this and really driven it forwards. And where great design goes, then of course everyone else will follow. So that's really encouraging. And the earlier you design those things in as well, the more you can be effective with planting actually into the furniture, or adding whole walls of greenery like you do at ANS.
That's really good, because can you just say a bit more about that? Because there are designers and architects that are leading in these green spaces, but there's a lot actually at the moment that are unsure how to include it. And there's key elements in design that need to be followed through. It's not just a question about where can cloud make some plants grow here. It's the plants will require certain lighting and certain environments. Can you just say a bit briefly about how to guide architects and designers as how they can take into account all the areas of design that needs to be considered?
Yeah, absolutely. We try to make it as simple as possible for people to get these kinds of designs implemented and off the ground and installed and handed over. It doesn't need to be complicated and difficult. I think what's most important to bear in mind with this is that the designer visualizes what the end result should look like. They're the person with the bold ideas. And really the sky's the limit as far as what you can do with planting now. It can be put anywhere. It can be hung from the ceiling. It can go on your wall as an piece of installation art, or indeed as a full living wall. You can also go for something really long lasting, like a moss wall, for example, and also put the planting into cabinet tops or into the centre of seating, or use it as screening. There's just so many different options. So the designers can literally design how they want to see it. And then a company like us at Planteria will come along and do a site visit and take into account how much natural light there is coming in, or where if you've got some really good artificial lighting, even that can be really good for indoor plants. As you know, it doesn't need to be real natural lighting. As long as you've got lighting that's on most of the time during the day, then that planting is probably going to be fine. And we will then specify the right type of plants to thrive in that area, because there's so many options when it comes to plants. So even if a designer or an architect says, I want this specific type of plant, and it won't survive, we would let them know that. Obviously, we wouldn't put something in there that doesn't survive, but we'd find something that has a similar look and feel to that plant that will thrive in that area. And of course, we'd then look after it as well. Once the installation happens of the planting, we'd do the ongoing maintenance of that to make sure that everything looks perfect all the time.
And that is really important, actually, when you're installing green infrastructure. And I think architects and designers need to be aware of that when they've got a vision and a purpose to make a big, inspiring green space, maintenance must be built into that right from the start, because if they're going to make the investment, we're creating a well-being space. We're going to start achieving some incredible environmental results, but we must keep it maintained, and that is so important. It mustn't be overlooked. Do you say?
I agree. And do you know what? I totally agree with you. And I think the other thing that we kind of the message that we really need to get out to people is that planting is not expensive. It's not an expensive item to add in, and yet it has it's such a great return on investment in terms of the actual benefits and the improvements to your staff's well-being, to their productivity levels, to reducing absenteeism, because you're creating an environment that helps people to feel better and cope with situations better. So, for example, you could pretty much fill your office and have a beautifully green, biophilically designed office for less than somebody's annual salary. For the whole service from start to finish, looking after, maintaining all of that planting and keeping it all looking beautiful. It's really a fantastic option. And when you consider it, when you compare it to other things, the hard furnishings, the infrastructure of the office, the other services that you're going to pay for, and your facilities management costs, it really is not an expensive item at all.
No, and it's not an expensive item. And could you just enlarge on that? You mentioned about the benefits of biophilia and what we're going to achieve.
Yes.
And you often hear people say, yeah, but it's only plants, or I'm only just putting a few plants in. But actually what they need to understand is the return on investment and what biophilic design really means in the office space.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that in an organization, the people costs are one of the biggest costs, right? So we know that, and obviously you hear time and again companies say our people are our biggest asset. Without our people, we wouldn't have a company. That's really true. But we also know that so our people costs and our property costs are the biggest costs we've got. And compared to something like, for example, our energy costs, we spend 112 times the amount of money on our people costs as we do on our energy costs in the business. That's an average. So it makes sense then, if that's your biggest cost, and if that's your biggest asset, that you're really looking after your people. There's a war on talent right now as well. we know that there's been a kind of like the second wave of the pandemic is almost the great resignation, as people have been working from home and they've had time to really focus in on what's important for them. They might have got a bit disenchanted with things because they are disconnected from people. It's been difficult to stay engaged with staff for a lot of companies over this period. So we need to make sure that keep the people that we really need in that business, and also that we attract new talent in. And one of the ways of doing that is by having a really attractive workspace, somewhere that we can come together and really create a good company culture, and also somewhere that reflects what you feel as an organization, who you are as an organization. So if you have a really committed ESG policy, you want to be sustainable and green, and yet your office is devoid of planting, and is just 4 bare walls and an open workspace, is that really reflective of the culture of the company that you want to create? I would suggest not. And ours, we're sort of inviting people back into the workspace, back into the office. It's so important that the office is attractive if you're going to be interviewing people, and these people are going to be working in this space. So for one, that's the first thing. Secondly, people being at their best, at their optimal, feeling great during the day, being able to really create great results. Well, we know that biophilic design can improve productivity and creativity by up to 15%. So that's from a study that was done in 2014 by Exeter University, quite a famous study. There's lots of great information about this one online. So, if this is one of those things that people are thinking, wow, is that just a statistic? There's actually lots of it's a really interesting study to read, and it was done in a real workspace. So the study was done where they put plants in, and then they were finding out what people felt and how they performed in that workspace when there were plants there and when there weren't plants there. And when there were plants there, the employees were far more engaged, physically, cognitively, and emotionally with their work, and 15% more productive from having an enriched environment to work in. And I think I can understand that, because I personally, if I'm having to work from home, from my kitchen, I know that I feel entirely different if I'm working from our office where I'm surrounded by planting. I am much more engaged and switched on when I'm working from the office. It is my preferred place to work. So just from my own point of view, I can totally see why that is. Another a sort of statistic to bring into this as well is that another study was done by the University of Oregon that found that a building or architecture that had no connection to nature at all, so not even sort of views out of the window onto greenery, which, as you know and I know, most London offices don't have a view onto greenery. Most people are facing another person's office or a brick wall or a road or whatever it might be. So those environments actually could be attributed to employee absence, and that 10% of employee absences were attributed to a building with no connection to nature. So again, that ability to connect in with nature, to be surrounded by nature, will make people feel and actually be physically healthier and more well. And there's another study that has been done which says that the time that you need to spend and connecting with nature for optimal health, for optimal good health, is 20 minutes a day. So if you can spend 20 minutes a day outside walking in nature, then that is ideal for longevity, for overall good health. So, like markers like heart rate, blood pressure, your general overall health can actually be measured against that. And that's something that GPs in some areas are looking to do, is to prescribe exercising in nature as a holistic approach to managing health conditions. But of course, as you mentioned earlier on, if you're spending 90% of your time in an inside environment, then it's so important that we try to bring that connection indoors.
Yeah, and that is really important. Bring that connection indoors, because we know if you live in a city, you work in a city, you commute in, you're not getting that connection at all. So you could, I mean, we know what it's like in the winter months. You can leave home and it's dark. You come into the office, and when you leave the office, it's dark, and you've been in the street scenes all day. You've had no connection with nature, and that can really, really cause mental fatigue as it goes on. And then you start thinking about the actual environment you're working in as well, because plants will actually bring in the humidity. They increase the humidity. It can help combat dry eyes and other skin situations, and the air quality that we breathe. Offices and reception areas, etc., can be very high in VOCs, the volatile organic compound, and plants will assist in increasing the oxygen output and in cleaning the air, won't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. And another great thing about having planting in, especially the kind of planting that we find more commonly these days, that you're sitting in front of, having a living wall or a moss wall in the office is great for sound absorption. And so if you are in a large space that is normally quite echoey, if you're doing these kind of Zoom meetings, or you're having that kind of conversation with somebody, it's nice that you don't sound like you're in a bathroom,
Yeah, exactly.
So where the sound is just bouncing off the hard walls, if you've got planting in there, it'll help to refract the sound around and absorb that cacophony.
And that's something that we're going to be finding going forward. As we've gone through this pandemic, we've realized how much can be done digitally and on screen. Yeah. And obviously we're all looking to reduce our carbon footprint. We're looking to work as efficiently and sustainably as possible.
Yes, yeah.
So in one sense, that has great opportunities, but it also means we have to start thinking for the future and how we're going to design for the future. Because if the office is going to become much more geared up for Zoom meetings, for virtual meetings over against face-to-face, then we need to make sure we've got the environment to thrive. Otherwise, we are going to start seeing staff suffer, aren't we?
Absolutely. I completely agree. And you were mentioned as well about we were talking about the views from windows, but actually that's a really good point as well, is that I know especially with your ANS products, things like green roofs, and using outdoor space efficiently. So even if you've got a small terrace or a balcony in your office, it really makes a lot of sense to put the greenery there, because by doing that, you're being a good neighbour to your to your fellow neighbours in your urban area by providing a view from other people's windows. Yeah. So not only a space for your staff or for you to be able to escape out onto, to maybe have a coffee break or an informal meeting in an outdoor area that's got some greenery in it, and to be able to put green roofs on, but that's going to be great for a bit of biodiversity, encouraging some insect life, and making for a more beautiful view. We really do need to think about urban greenery and improving it for everybody that's occupying London, not just for us in our lovely offices that look beautiful in the inside.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true, because as you mentioned there, biodiversity, which is something that we can link with biophilia. We rightly so, we think of biophilic design internally, which is absolutely correct, and that's what we've been very helpfully discussing with you this afternoon. But biophilic cities and biophilic towns, biophilic views, is just that. It's greening up the balconies, greening up spaces externally, and then obviously choosing the plants that are going to work in that environment, because we can add pollinators outside. You can add plants that are going to work for the ecology, but then we have to think carefully about hay fever, etc. So when you start looking at plant design, we must think of the purpose. What is the purpose of plants? What's going on the balcony? Is it going to be discovery? Is it biophilic? Is it color? Or are we going for pollinators, ecology, and that kind of thing? And if we're going to go down that route, then we need to just make sure that we're covering every area, because what we don't want to do is often get the question come up saying, if I put plants on the balcony, will I cause hay fever sufferers to start sneezing inside? Well, if you use the wrong plants, you will. Is that fair?
I suppose
How
that's
would you
fair.
answer that?
Well, I would say that's probably fair, but the quantity that you're talking about in London is very few, and I would say I don't have much sympathy, because I live in rural Essex, and if you've got hay fever, you're just done for. Like, basically, if you open a window in the summer, you're going to sneeze, because there's so much pollen around, you just cannot escape it. So.
Yeah, so it's good. So I always like to put that settle that myth, because I often get people saying, "Oh, I'm going to get hay fever sufferers," but actually introducing biophilic design into our offices
inside is not a problem
is
at all.
Actually creating a healthy, clean, fresh atmosphere that your staff will thrive.
Yeah, and you don't get pollen with house plants. There's very few, I think, with the interior plants that we would have. So that is definitely not an issue. I had an experience walking through London last summer where I passed some trees, and I don't know what kind of trees they were, but they had me sneezing for about 20 minutes, and those trees have probably been there for a good 150 years. So you can't really escape it, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's why I brought it up, because I like to make it really clear to anybody that listens to this and follows on that hay fever is not a problem, and plants will not cause any issue inside a building or outside.
No, they're different type of plants.
It's creating, a new space. And as we come out of the pandemic, this new space has got to become the norm for our offices.
Yes.
We've got to think, as we said right at the beginning, where can we include green infrastructure rather than quickly panic and add it in at the end? The power of design, the power of nature is something that we can really thrive on, I think.
Fantastic.
Well, Katie, it's been brilliant to have you on today. I found it very helpful. I've learned a lot. Have you got anything else you want to round off with?
No, I think Steve, I've been lovely to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.